17-year-old Mason Parker stood frozen in the doorway of his childhood home, overnight bag clutched in his hand. The evening had started normally enough, returning from a weekend at his friend's place, expecting to find his mother cooking dinner and his father watching sports in the living room. Instead, he found boxes, dozens of them, stacked neatly by the entrance, all labeled Mason in his mother's careful handwriting. "Mom?" he called out, stepping around the tower of cardboard. "Dad? What's going on?" The sound of hushed, urgent voices drifted from the kitchen. Mason dropped his bag and followed them, his stomach knotting with each step. His parents fell silent as he entered the room. His mother, Rebecca, sat at the table, eyes red-rimmed but dry. His father, Daniel, stood by the counter, arms crossed tightly over his chest. And between them sat a stranger, a man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive watch that caught the light as he fidgeted with a coffee mug. "Who's this?" Mason asked, though something in him already knew. The pieces were falling into place. The mysterious phone calls his mother had been taking in the garden, her sudden interest in makeup and new clothes, the growing silence between his parents. "Mason," his mother began, her voice steadier than he expected. "This is Gregory. We've been seeing each other." "Seeing each other," his father repeated, the words dripping with venom. "For 8 months, apparently." Mason's world tilted. 8 months? You've been cheating on Dad for 8 months? It's complicated, honey. Rebecca reached for Mason's hand, but he pulled away. "Gregory and I, we've known each other since college. We reconnected at my high school reunion last year." "So what are the boxes for?" Mason asked, though he already knew the answer. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Gregory before looking back at her son. "Gregory has asked me to move in with him, and I've said yes. We're selling the house," Daniel added flatly. "Your mother gets half, I get half. Clean break." Mason felt his chest constrict. "And what about me?" The silence that followed was deafening. It was Gregory who broke it, clearing his throat as he adjusted his designer glasses. "My condo is quite small," he said, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. "Just a 2-bedroom. Rebecca and I thought it would be best if..." "If what?" Mason cut in. "If I just disappeared?" "No one's disappearing," Rebecca said quickly. "But you're 17 now, almost 18. We thought maybe you could stay with your father. He's looking at apartments closer to downtown." Daniel's bitter laugh filled the kitchen. "I'm looking at 1-bedrooms, Beck. On my teacher's salary, that's all I can afford now." Mason looked between his parents, realization dawning. "So neither of you want me?" "That's not what this is about," Rebecca protested, but her eyes couldn't meet his. "Then what is it about?" Mason demanded, his voice rising. "Where am I supposed to go?" Gregory cleared his throat again. "I understand your Aunt Lydia lives nearby. Perhaps..." "You don't get to speak," Mason snapped. "You don't get to have any say in my life." Rebecca stood up, her chair scraping against the tile. "Mason, that's enough. We're trying to figure this out like adults." "Adults?" Mason felt something break loose inside him. Adults don't throw their kid out because their new boyfriend doesn't have enough bedrooms. "No one's throwing you out," Rebecca insisted, "but things are changing, and we all need to adjust." Mason looked around the kitchen, the place where he'd eaten breakfast every morning for as long as he could remember. The wall where his height had been marked year after year. The window where he'd watched countless sunsets while doing homework at the table. "When?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "Your mother's moving out this weekend," Daniel replied. "I'll be gone by the end of the month." Mason turned to leave, then stopped. "And me? When do I need to be gone by?" Neither parent answered. That was answer enough. Mason turned and left the kitchen without another word. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom, still his for the next few days at least, and shut the door behind him. The muffled argument between his parents resumed immediately. He sank onto his bed, staring blankly at the Star Wars poster he'd had since he was 12. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his best friend, Caleb. "How'd it go? Parents flip about the party?" Mason almost laughed. The party at Caleb's while his parents were away seemed like such a trivial concern now. He tossed his phone aside without replying and lay back on his bed, trying to process what was happening. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Not now, Mom," he called out. The door opened anyway, but it wasn't Rebecca. It was his father, looking more worn than Mason had ever seen him. "Hey, Champ," Daniel said, the old nickname sounding hollow. "Can we talk?" Mason sat up, making room on the bed. Daniel sat down heavily, the springs creaking beneath his weight. "I didn't know about the boxes," he said after a moment. "Your mother did that while I was at the hardware store. I wouldn't have—" He broke off, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you." "Then don't," Mason said simply. Daniel sighed. "It's not that easy. The mortgage on this place, 2 households now. I'll be lucky if I can afford a place with a pull-out couch for you to crash on weekends." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their new reality settling between them. "What about Aunt Lydia?" Mason finally asked. Daniel's face darkened. "Your mother's idea. I don't want to burden my sister, but you don't have a better plan," Mason finished for him. Another silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Gregory's expensive car starting in the driveway. Rebecca was leaving with him. Just for dinner, presumably, but it felt like the beginning of the end. "I'm sorry, Mason," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I should have seen this coming. Should have saved more, been more. I don't know." Mason felt an unexpected surge of compassion for his father. For all his life, Daniel had been the rock of the family, steady, reliable, always there. Now he looked lost. "It's not your fault," Mason said, surprised to find he meant it. After his father left, Mason pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His thumb hovered over Aunt Lydia's name before moving on. He wasn't ready to ask for help, not yet. Instead, he called Caleb back. "Dude, what happened?" Caleb answered immediately. "Your mom find the vodka bottle under the porch swing?" "My parents are splitting up," Mason said, the words feeling unreal. "Mom's got a boyfriend, they're selling the house, and neither of them has room for me." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Mason checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "That's messed up," Caleb finally said. "Where are you going to go?" "No idea." Another pause. "Come back to my place. My parents are still in Aspen till Tuesday." "And then what?" "Then we figure it out," Caleb said, as if it were that simple. "Just come over." Mason packed what he could fit into his backpack: clothes, his laptop, chargers, and the framed photo of him with both his parents from their trip to Yellowstone 2 years ago, before what he now realized was the beginning of the end. Downstairs, his father sat alone at the kitchen table, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. The boxes with Mason's name were still by the door. "I'm going to Caleb's," Mason said. "For a couple days." Daniel nodded without looking up. "I'll talk to Lydia tomorrow, and some colleagues at school who might have a spare room to rent." "Right," Mason said, lingering in the doorway. He wanted to say something more, to rage at his father for giving up so easily, to demand that he fight harder for both of them. But the defeated slump of Daniel's shoulders stopped him. "I'll text you," Mason said instead, and let himself out. The walk to Caleb's house took 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which Mason tried to imagine what his life would look like now. Would he have to change schools in his senior year? Where would he store all his things? Who would help him apply for college? Caleb was waiting on the front porch, 2 bottles of beer beside him. He held one out as Mason approached. "Pretty sure this counts as contributing to the delinquency of a minor," Mason said with a weak smile. but he took the bottle anyway. Pretty sure your parents forfeited their right to complain about your moral development, Caleb replied. You okay? Mason took a long swig of beer before answering. Number, not even close. You can crash here as long as you need to, Caleb said. My mom likes you better than me anyway. Your mom tolerates me because I get you to study for finals, Mason corrected him. Whatever works. Caleb clinked his bottle against Mason's. We'll figure something out. For the first time since seeing those boxes, Mason felt something other than panic. Not hope, exactly, but a small, warm certainty that he wasn't completely alone. 4 days at Caleb's house turned into a week. Mason attended school as usual, pretending everything was normal while his life disintegrated around him. He'd exchanged a few terse texts with his mother and awkward phone calls with his father, but mostly he tried not to think about either of them. Caleb's parents returned from their trip and, after hearing the situation, insisted Mason could stay as long as he needed. The guest room is yours, Mrs. Rodriguez had said, squeezing his shoulder. No rush. But Mason knew he couldn't hide in their guest room forever. On Friday afternoon, instead of going home with Caleb, he found himself standing outside Aunt Lydia's small craftsman house on Maple Street. He hadn't called ahead, partly because he wasn't sure what to say, and partly because he feared being turned away before he could say anything at all. He knocked on the door, heart hammering in his chest. Aunt Lydia answered, her eyebrows rising in surprise. At 45, she looked remarkably like his father. Same green eyes, same wry smile. The siblings had always been close, which made it all the more strange that Mason hadn't visited in months. Mason? She said, pulling the door wide. This is unexpected. Sorry for just showing up, he mumbled. Can I come in? Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Mason sank into a chair at the table, suddenly exhausted. The weight of the past week crashed over him as Lydia put a mug in front of him and sat down across the table. Your father called, she said gently. 4 days ago. Mason stared into the steaming mug. And I told him my nephew is welcome to stay with me for as long as he needs. She paused. I've been waiting for you to reach out. I didn't want to be a burden. Lydia's laugh was sharp. A burden? Mason, you're family. The only burden would be knowing you needed help and weren't asking for it. Mom and Dad both basically said they don't have room for me, Mason said, the words still painful to speak aloud. They're both just moving on. Lydia's face darkened. Your father is heartbroken and floundering. And your mother? She hesitated. Rebecca is making choices I don't understand. She chose Gregory, Mason said bitterly. She chose herself, Lydia corrected. Which isn't always wrong, but the way she's going about it… She shook her head. Let's focus on you. What do you need right now? What did he need? The question was so direct, so simple, and yet Mason realized no one had asked him that since the day he'd found those boxes. I need to graduate, he said finally. I need to not switch schools for senior year. I need… His voice cracked. I need a home. Lydia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The guest room here is bigger than your old room, and it's 5 minutes closer to your school. I can pay rent, Mason offered. I've got savings from the coffee shop job, and I can do chores, cooking. Mason, Lydia cut him off gently. I'm not offering you a rental agreement. I'm offering you a home. Something tight in Mason's chest began to loosen. He took a sip of coffee to hide the sudden burning in his eyes. What about Dad? He asked. And Mom? What about them? Lydia's voice was steady. They need to sort themselves out, but you don't have to be collateral damage while they do it. That night, Mason texted both his parents the same message. Staying at Aunt Lydia's. We'll pick up more of my things this weekend. His mother responded immediately. I'm so sorry, Mason. We'll talk soon, I promise. I love you. It was the first time she'd said that since the night everything fell apart. His father took longer. Lydia's good people. Better than your mom and me right now. I'll help move your stuff. Love you, champ. 3 weeks later, Mason's room at Lydia's house looked like it had always been his. His Star Wars poster hung on the wall, his books filled the shelves, and a new desk, a housewarming gift from Caleb's parents, sat under the window. The doorbell rang one Saturday morning as Mason was helping Lydia make pancakes. He opened the door to find his mother standing uncertainly on the porch, Gregory noticeably absent. "Can we talk?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. She held out a thick envelope. "Your college applications. Your father said you were worried about them." Mason hesitated, then stepped back to let her in. "Aunt Lydia's helping me with those." Rebecca nodded, looking both relieved and sad. "She always was better at the important stuff than me." "You were good at it too," Mason said carefully. "Before." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I know I handled everything wrong. I was so caught up in what I wanted that I forgot what you needed." She paused. "I miss you." "I miss who you used to be," Mason replied honestly. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Lydia called from the kitchen. "Invite her for pancakes, Mason. There's plenty." Rebecca smiled tentatively. "Chocolate chip?" "Blueberry," Mason corrected. "Aunt Lydia says chocolate is for dessert, not breakfast." "Smart woman," Rebecca said. Then more softly, "Are you okay here?" Mason thought about the question, about Lydia's quiet support and unwavering presence, about his father's weekly visits and their slowly healing relationship, about his mother's mistakes and her halting attempts to make amends. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm getting there." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Come have pancakes, and then maybe we can talk about everything." As they walked toward the kitchen, Mason realized something important. Home wasn't the house he'd grown up in, or the boxes his mother had packed. It wasn't even this new room at Aunt Lydia's, comfortable as it was becoming. Home was in the people who showed up, who made room, who stayed. And maybe, just maybe, there was still room for his parents in that definition, not as the center of his universe anymore, but as flawed people finding their way back to being family, whatever shape that might take now.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.